Do you believe in forgiving or forgetting?
Grandma's 80th birthday was supposed to be one of those picture-perfect family milestones, the kind of event where everyone shows up in their best Sunday clothes, pretends that grudges don't exist, and forces smiles wide enough to hide decades of pettiness. The rented hall was decorated with golden balloons in the shape of an 8 and a 0. The tables were lined with white tablecloths, and there was a towering cake already waiting at the back of the room with "Happy Birthday, Margaret" piped in thick pink frosting. I arrived alone, as usual, because it was easier to walk into that den of judgmental eyes without someone else having to share the discomfort. From the second I pushed open the double doors, I felt the same old buzz in the air, a strange mixture of saccharine affection and sharp undertones, like sugar stirred into bitter coffee. Cousins were scattered everywhere, holding drinks and showing off their kids, bragging about new houses, promotions, and the endless small victories that always seemed more like performances than conversations. Grandma sat at the head table in a pale lavender dress, the kind she would have worn to church decades ago, her smile wide but her eyes scanning the room like a queen checking who had bothered to pay tribute. My parents were absent, another layer of family politics best left unexplained, but their absence only gave the rest of the relatives more reason to evaluate me under a harsher lens, as though I represented them by default. The gift bags appeared halfway through the dinner, brought out in neat stacks by my Aunt Linda, who was always the organizer of these grand displays of unity. Glossy white bags with gold tissue paper poking out of the top were handed to every cousin. One by one, I watched the bags being passed around the table, each cousin pulling theirs close with a smile, holding it on their laps like a prize, while Linda chirped about how she had thought of everyone. I waited politely, assuming there was one for me tucked away in the pile, maybe with my name spelled wrong on the tag like it usually was, but still mine. The pile dwindled. The laughter got louder. And then it stopped. Every bag had found a hand except mine. There was no dramatic announcement, no cruel statement hurled in my direction. Just silence. The kind of silence that fills a room with invisible smoke, suffocating and heavy, while people pretend not to notice. A few cousins shifted in their seats. One of them, Matthew, smirked and gave me a little shrug, like even he couldn't believe they had gone that far but also wasn't surprised. I sat there, smiling politely as if nothing had happened, while inside me something sharp twisted. I laughed lightly and said, "Guess I didn't make the cut," in a tone meant to sound playful, though every syllable scraped my throat. Grandma chuckled awkwardly and clapped her hands for everyone to open their bags, as though my omission could be erased if we all moved forward fast enough. I played along. I leaned over to peek at my cousin Sarah's bag, commenting on how cute the little candle inside was, how thoughtful the notepad seemed, while my stomach tightened into knots. The whole table performed with me, every cousin pretending this was fine, that I was fine, that exclusion could be glossed over with polite laughter and a refill of sweet tea. But the more they tried to pretend, the more the humiliation cemented itself in my chest. Eventually, I excused myself, claiming I needed fresh air. The parking lot was bathed in orange light from the setting sun, the shadows stretching long across the cracked asphalt. I stood near my car, pulled out my phone, and turned the camera on myself. I smiled wide, but it was not the soft smile of joy. It was sharp, practiced, almost mocking, the kind of smile you use when you want to show the world you are perfectly fine while making it clear you are not. The click of the camera shutter felt like pulling a trigger. I looked at the photo for a long moment, tilting my head, noticing how my eyes gave me away even though the smile did not. And then, with a calmness that felt both dangerous and liberating, I typed a caption. It was short, sharp, and carefully chosen, a combination of words that looked harmless on the surface, but carried a weight only my family would understand. I hit post. Then I slipped back into the hall, kissed Grandma on the cheek, wished her a happy birthday again, and announced that I had to leave early. She gave me a puzzled look, asked if I was sure, and I told her I was fine, that I was just tired. No one protested. In fact, I could swear a few of them looked relieved, as though my presence had been a weight they were glad to be rid of. I walked out with my head high, my phone heavy in my hand, and the echo of my heels tapping against the linoleum louder than the music playing behind me. I drove home in silence, the glow of my screen lighting up with notifications, comments, likes, a few private messages already trickling in. My caption was working faster than I expected. I poured a glass of wine, kicked off my shoes, and let myself laugh, really laugh, for the first time that evening. And then, 2 hours later, my phone rang. Aunt Linda's name lit up the screen. Her voice, when I answered, wasn't chirpy or commanding. It was broken, shaking, and drenched in panic. She was crying, and she said words I will never forget. "Emily, please, you don't understand what you've done." That was the moment I knew the post had cut far deeper than I ever intended. I let the call ring out while I stood in my kitchen with the glass of wine pressed against my palm like a small, obedient animal giving off quiet warmth. Because there was something satisfyingly precise about allowing the panic that had once lived in me to visit someone else for a change. And while the ringtone throbbed against the counter, I opened my feed to read the comments that had begun to cluster beneath the photo like moths around a porch light. The public reactions were polite in that passive-aggressive, suburban way, friends from high school offering gentle sympathy, a coworker adding a heart, a neighbor chiming in with a line about family being complicated. But the direct messages told a different story entirely, because there were cousins who suddenly wanted to check in. There was Matthew writing that I should not blow things out of proportion. And there was Sarah sending a single line that sounded helpful but bled with cowardice, asking if I wanted her to talk to someone on my behalf, as though I were a child without a voice who needed a polite courier to carry a complaint to the adults. The missed call became a voicemail, and I didn't listen yet, because I wanted my nerves to settle into something steadier than hurt. And I wanted to remember with clear eyes how many times a room full of people had watched me get less than everyone else and pretended it was weather, unavoidable and not worth mentioning. And I wanted the 2 hours that had just passed to teach them that silence can be louder than an argument if you give it a little gasoline and strike it with the right caption. I walked to the window and saw my reflection overlaying the parking lot below, my smile now a softer line, and I let myself think about the long run up to this evening, the birthdays where my name was spelled wrong on the cake, the holidays where my plate was always the seat filler at the wobbling card table, the small jokes about how I liked to make a point, when what I actually liked was fairness. And the winter when I took 2 jobs to afford a certification while my brother received a down payment for a car because he was on the right track, a track that somehow always began under his feet with the rails already polished. The family group chat lit up like emergency sirens, and, because I am not stupid, I keep the alerts on mute, but the thread still stacked itself in the corner of my screen with preview lines that read like stage directions for a play about denial. Linda asking if anyone had spoken to me, an uncle clarifying that I must be misunderstanding, Grandma's nurse chiming in with a reminder that today is about joy, and a cousin who never texts me directly proposing that it would be healing if I apologized for the implication that the family was anything but generous. I laughed at that word, healing, because healing in our family always meant putting a rug over a stain and then telling the person who spilled to stop talking about the rug. I poured a second glass and finally opened Aunt Linda's voicemail, which started mid-breath like she had sprinted through every hallway in her house looking for the right room to call from, and, while her words tumbled out in a breathless mix of pleading and scolding, "Call me back right now. This isn't what you think. You're going to ruin your grandmother's day. There are things you don't know." What caught my attention wasn't the message, but the tone that floated beneath it like something alive in dark water, because it wasn't just irritation or shame, it was fear, the kind of fear that knows the shape of the knife without seeing the blade. I replayed it and noticed the way she said, "things you don't know," the plural dangling there, heavy and obvious, and I felt the first clean click of leverage settle into place like a lock sliding open in a quiet hallway. The clever, tiny piece of revenge I chose next did not involve shouting, and it did not require anything that could be screenshotted as an accusation. Because the most efficient tool in any family full of whisperers is a mirror held high enough that everyone wonders what it might reflect, so I posted a second story with the same selfie, cropped tighter. and wrote a caption that looked like a motivational slogan to anyone outside our circle, but would read like a fire alarm inside it. Funny how a missing bag can remind you where the receipts are stored. I set the audience to friends only, made sure several cousins and Aunt Linda were squarely included, and hit publish, then turned my phone face down and let the algorithm and the family conscience do their predictable, frantic dance. Within minutes, private messages multiplied, some wheedling, some angry, and one from a cousin I liked, quiet, generous Megan, asking if I was safe, which I understood as code for, "Are you sure you want to start this?" And I answered her with a simple, steady line that said I was tired of pretending not to notice, which made her send back a sad little heart that looked like surrender. The group chat fractured into subchats, and another message pinged from an unfamiliar number that turned out to be my uncle's second wife, offering to mediate, a word that landed like a cheap rug on a fresh stain. I took a deep breath, opened my notes app, and wrote 3 bullet points I would never share but would carry like a compass. They excluded me deliberately. They count on my silence to keep the surface smooth. Fear means there is more beneath the surface than they want me to see. Then, as the phone vibrated again with Aunt Linda's name, I chose one more neat, surgical act of payback that didn't look like payback at all. I answered with the blandest voice I could manage and said I was happy to talk. But I needed her to repeat everything on speaker because I was taking notes to keep details straight. A sentence that sounded helpful and almost painfully reasonable while slipping a cold hand around the part of her that still believed I was harmless. There was a pause long enough to hear her swallow, and then she said my name in a soft, choked way that almost made me pity her, except that pity is a luxury people offer when the scales have been balanced, and ours had not been for years. And right as she inhaled to begin, a second line flashed across my screen with Grandma's caller ID, which twisted the air in my kitchen into something electric and dangerous, because if Linda was afraid of me, I suddenly wondered what Grandma was afraid of, and whether the truth I had invited into the room was larger than anything I had guessed. When I finally pressed the green button to take Linda's call, her words spilled into my ear like water from a pipe that had just burst, and the desperation in her voice carried none of the polished authority she usually used when organizing family gatherings. Because all at once she sounded small, frightened, and frantic, like someone who knew a secret had just slipped out of its box and could not be shoved back inside. She started with accusations, saying my caption was cruel, that it was unnecessary to humiliate people on a day that should have been about joy. But even through the rising pitch of her panic, I could hear the undertone of dread. The kind that told me this wasn't about a missing gift bag anymore, but about something much heavier pressing on her chest. I didn't interrupt her right away. I let her rant and cry, pacing slowly around my apartment with the phone on speaker, listening as she circled back again and again to that one phrase, "You don't know what you've done." She begged me to delete the post, pleaded that I was putting Grandma through stress she didn't deserve, and then her voice cracked in a way I had never heard before, a jagged sob breaking through the performance. That was when she slipped, when her fear forced her to reveal the part she had spent years burying under cheerful hosting and self-righteous scolding. "If people start asking questions," she whispered, almost like she had forgotten I was on the line, "it won't just be me who suffers. Your grandmother will lose everything, and you." She cut herself off, but the damage was done, because my mind was already racing ahead, trying to stitch the pieces together. I stayed calm, playing my part with careful precision. I told her I didn't understand, that I had only meant the caption as a joke, that maybe people were overreacting, and in that soft, false innocence I could feel her unraveling further. She blurted out something about inheritance, about funds being shifted for the right reasons, about cousins who had needed the help more than others, and though her sentences tangled together, the picture forming in my mind was suddenly clearer than ever. The gift bags, the favoritism, the constant dismissal of my efforts, it wasn't just emotional neglect, it was financial strategy. They had been propping up certain cousins with money and gifts, smoothing over their failures with quiet cash, while telling themselves I didn't need anything because I was independent, a word they used like a punishment rather than a compliment. I let her talk until her voice became hoarse, until she was practically confessing into the phone, and all the while I murmured soothing words as if I were the one offering comfort, when in reality I was cataloging every detail, every stammered admission. Every half-sentence she tried to claw back into her throat. By the time she realized how much she had revealed, it was too late, and when she asked me directly if I had shared the caption because I knew about the money, I paused long enough for her to spiral further before answering with a measured, deliberate tone. Linda, I only know what people show me. If there's more, that's not on me. The silence that followed was so long I thought the line had dropped, but then she exhaled, a shaky, defeated breath, and told me she would make this right, though she didn't say how. Before she hung up, she tried one last time to guilt me, reminding me that Grandma was 80 and fragile, that I should think about the consequences of digging up things that were better left buried, but her words had lost their bite. The mask was gone. I ended the call and sat down at the edge of my couch, staring at the glow of my phone in the darkened room, my wine forgotten on the counter. My caption had been a barb thrown in anger, but now it had unearthed something far bigger, something I hadn't even realized was possible. I scrolled back to my photo, looked at my own smiling face, and realized it had become a weapon far sharper than I had intended. The family wasn't just panicking because I had complained about being left out, they were panicking because a single pointed sentence had pulled at the loose thread holding together years of hidden arrangements, favoritism, and unspoken debts. The vibration of another incoming call rattled the phone in my hand, and when I saw Grandma's name on the screen, the smile I had forced for that photo spread across my lips again, only this time it wasn't covering hurt, it was covering anticipation. Because if Linda was this terrified, I could only imagine what my grandmother was about to say, and I knew that whatever words came next would either confirm the story I was piecing together or lead me somewhere even darker. Grandma's name was still glowing on my screen when I answered, and the voice that came through was not the sweet sing-song she saved for church friends or the brittle brightness she used at family dinners, but a careful, measured tone that reminded me of someone balancing a full tray and praying no one bumped the table, because she started by telling me I had made a scene out of nothing, rolled straight into how adults handle things privately, and then, with a pause that felt like a door closing, said she hoped I understood that money decisions were made to protect the family, a phrase so tidy and bloodless it almost hid the part where protection had always seemed to skip my address while landing decisively on everyone else's porch. She asked me to take down the post, told me it was a misunderstanding, insisted that Aunt Linda loved me like her own, and, in case I missed the message, reminded me that the will, her word, not mine, was a living document, which was the nicest possible way to say that love in our family often sat in the passenger seat while leverage drove the car. I told her I hurt her, which was true, and I told her I had no intention of embarrassing her, which was also true, because what was happening now was not embarrassment, it was clarity with a microphone, and when she slipped and said, "There are transfers that could be misinterpreted by people who don't understand the full picture," I felt the quiet click of confirmation that the puzzle I had been assembling was no longer a guess, since there is nothing more revealing than someone worrying out loud about things no one has yet accused them of. I kept my voice even, explained that I had posted a simple caption about a missing gift bag, that any conclusions drawn by relatives were their own doing. And when she bristled and asked if I was threatening her, I let a small tired laugh escape and said I was past threats, because I was done asking for a seat at a table where the place cards were written in pencil for me and pen for everyone else. By the time we hung up, both of us were polite and both of us were lying, and while my hands shook with the leftover adrenaline, a steadier resolve sorted itself inside me like books sliding into neat rows, because I realized I didn't need to shout, expose bank statements, or publish anything ugly to get what I wanted, which wasn't money or apologies or even acceptance, but the simple fact of a ledger finally balanced in public. So I set my laptop on the kitchen table, opened a clean page, and built a little thing that looked harmless, but had teeth sharp enough to make everyone feel them when they smiled. A donation page titled, in big plain letters, "The Margaret Equity Fund," with a short description that said it was a family effort to honor Grandma by supporting cousins who had historically gotten less, that contributions were anonymous, and that the suggested amount, this part made me grin, was whatever each donor believed they had previously received in excess of fair, which meant no accusations, no names, and no proof, just a mirror with a helpful QR code that would sit in the middle of our living room and invite people to decide, privately and publicly at once, what fairness meant when their own hands were on the scale. I attached a single photo to the page, my party selfie again, cropped tighter so the smile looked like a knife with a handle, and below it I added a line that sounded like a Hallmark card to outsiders and a detonator to anyone in our orbit, a sentence that read, "Every family has a balance sheet. Tonight we begin to reconcile." Then I set the visibility to invite only, copied the link, and sent it in the family group chat with a note that said, "Given today's mix-up and years of uneven generosity, let's turn this into something real. Grandma, you inspired this, because nothing unsettles a room like a woman who smiles while she moves furniture that everyone swore was nailed to the floor." The thread exploded in the predictable ways, one uncle calling it manipulative, a cousin pretending not to understand the word excess, another asking if this was my idea of a joke, Grandma typing a long paragraph that said she appreciated the spirit, but preferred to keep giving private, and Aunt Linda pinging me privately with 3 messages in a row that started at condescending, slid into pleading, and ended at pure flustered rage. But there was something else in the flood that made my chest tighten with a wicked, complicated kind of relief, because right there between the performative outrage and the saccharine callbacks to family unity, a tiny notification bloomed from the donation page itself that said Anonymous contributed, followed moments later by a second one of the same kind, proof that either guilt wears a quick-draw holster or fear has a faster trigger finger, and for the first time all day I felt the ground settle beneath me as if I had finally found a step that didn't wobble. I posted one more story with a screenshot of the total donations without donor names, added the caption, "Thank you to those who believe balance is love with a spine," and then I put my phone down and breathed, long and slow. Because the room had shifted in a way that words alone never could, and I knew the aftermath would be ugly, but I also knew I had chosen a kind of revenge that worked like polite gravity, pulling everything crooked back towards center whether the furniture wanted to move or not. The screen lit again with Megan's name, and her message was not hearts or scolding or questions, but a blurry photo taken in Grandma's den of the old oak desk drawer pulled open and, inside, a manila folder with my full name written across the tab in my grandmother's careful cursive, followed by her text that said she was at the house helping clean up, that Aunt Linda had stepped outside to take yet another call, and that the folder was heavy, labeled "Adjustments," and sealed with a piece of yellowing tape. Then the typing dots danced, disappeared, and returned, and Megan asked, in the kind of soft, dangerous sentence that makes you hold your breath without meaning to, whether I wanted her to open it right now or wait until I was standing beside her. I told Megan to wait, not because I wanted to savor the moment like a villain twirling a mustache, but because after a lifetime of being told to calm down, to keep the peace, to act like things were fine while the scale leaned hard the other way, I wanted to walk into that den with my back straight and my eyes open, so I grabbed my keys, slid into my car, and drove through the soft dark with the donation page totals ticking upward in quiet, guilty increments, each anonymous ping like a pulse, returning to a limb that had been asleep for years, and by the time I turned onto Grandma Street, the porch lights along the block glowing like candles at a vigil, I had decided that if truth was a gift, it would not arrive wrapped in gloating or rage. It would arrive in a clear envelope with a stamp that said "Return to Sender." Megan let me in with a quick, fierce hug and guided me past the framed photographs, where every year looked happier than it had been, past the floral couch that smelled faintly of hairspray and lemon cleaner, straight to the old oak desk whose surface had hosted 1,000 birthday cards and 100 checks written with trembling hands, the manila folder waiting where she had left it, my name in Grandma's careful script sitting on top like a dare and a benediction at once. I broke the yellowed tape with my thumbnail, and the first pages slid out, Not dramatic or explosive, just neat spreadsheets and photocopied bank slips and tidy notes in a looping hand that labeled each movement of money as an adjustment. A word that did a lot of heavy lifting to make charity look like maintenance and favoritism look like stewardship, and beside each cousin's name there were numbers and dates and little hearts next to some entries, as if love could be itemized, while beside my name there were occasional annotations that said independent, self-sufficient, and once, in parentheses, does not ask, which landed in my chest with the exact soft thud of a compliment that has been sharpened into a weapon. Deeper in the folder was a letter on stationery with tiny violets printed across the top, written in Grandma's familiar voice that sounded, even on the page, like a woman who wanted the world to be tidy so her conscience could be, too. And it said she had always admired my strength, that she had trusted I would land on my feet, that she wished she could make it up to me, that she would even things out in the will, that this was a living document and she was still figuring it out, which is another way of saying that fairness is coming. Please do not ask when, please do not ask how, please do not ask why it never seems to arrive for you. There was also a codicil form half-filled, names sketched lightly in pencil like a rehearsal no one intended to perform in public, and tucked in the back flap were 3 glossy receipts from a boutique the size of a closet, dated last week. The exact value of 3 of those gift bags, which was almost funny in its smallness until you realized how cheap people can become when a habit of taking is dressed in the costume of tradition. I stood there with the folder open and felt the kind of anger that is not hot but cold, the kind that does not want to smash or burn, the kind that wants the room to carry its own weight without me propping up the corners. Megan watched my face and asked what I wanted to do, and the answer surprised me in its simplicity, because what I wanted was not to post scans or tag people or feed the rumor engine with gasoline. What I wanted was balance that could be felt even by people who refused to see it, so I said I would borrow the folder for exactly one night. That I would not remove a single page, that I would bring it back before morning, and that I needed a roll of painter's tape and an empty gift bag. At home, I laid the pages on my kitchen table and photographed only the headers and the first initials, never the full names, never the account numbers, just enough for the shape of the truth to be impossible to deny. Then I slipped one printed image into the bottom of a pristine white bag, taped the violet's letter to the inside seam where only the person who reached all the way in would see it, and on the outside of the bag I wrote in tidy block letters, receipt. Then drove back to the rental hall where the staff were stacking chairs and mopping up frosting, and set the bag on the cake table under the sleepy gaze of a helium balloon that had begun to sink, a small silent exhibit ready for whoever came early to clean, which in our family would be Aunt Linda, with her keys and her lists and her assumption that the morning would be neat as long as night stayed quiet. Back in my apartment, I opened the donation page and, with hands that had finally stopped shaking, posted a new update that said the fund would close at noon tomorrow and that totals would be forwarded to a nonprofit scholarship in Grandma's name for first-generation students in our county, which was the exact sort of gesture the family performed with speeches while someone else wrote the check. Then I scheduled a private email to each cousin who had contributed, thanking them for believing that love has a spine, attaching a blurred image of the spreadsheet header and a single line from the letter, I will even things out, and I did not send anything to those who had not because I wanted to punish them, but because silence is a reply with a long memory. The totals jumped once, twice, then stalled, the algorithm and the conscience reaching an uneasy truce, and as dawn pushed a pale line across my blinds I drove back to Grandma's, slipped the folder into the drawer exactly as I had found it, and sat in the car long enough to watch Aunt Linda arrive, see the bag, and freeze with the exact stillness of a person who has just heard a glass crack in a quiet room. By the afternoon the texts had changed their flavor, fewer accusations and more elliptical phrases about reviewing things and making amends, and Grandma sent a brief message asking if I would come by for tea on Sunday, which landed like an invitation and an audit all at once, while Megan wrote that 3 more anonymous donations had appeared the minute someone posted a photo of the bag without opening it, proof that guilt can be both blind and clairvoyant, and I felt a tired, almost tender victory settle in my bones. I scrolled to the selfie one last time and considered deleting it, then left it up with the caption unchanged, because sometimes the bridge you burn is only a wooden walkway to a place that never let you in. And sometimes the light from the fire is what finally shows you where the solid ground begins. Late that night, when the house was quiet and my phone had stopped buzzing, a final message arrived from a number saved with no name, just home, a single line that read, "Some truths do not need to be said to be understood," and I stared at it long enough to hear the echo behind the words, wondering whether it was a blessing, a warning, or a receipt of its own. And whether the balance had truly shifted or whether I had simply learned how to stop carrying it, and I let the question hang there unanswered because the silence felt, for once, like mine.